psychologically, your brain is just, it's biologically programmed to like preserve, you, and running 100 miles is not necessarily good for your survival. So what I'm trying to say is like you're gonna like have the moments where like you definitely like want to quit, and that's what I had in my first race, and you just have to like not accept that and like not have that like level of defeat.
Running 100 miles seems impossible, and maybe even kind of crazy. And it is, but we believe in big crazy dreams. That's why we ran 100 miles. It was such a life-changing experience for us, we decided to devote this podcast to preparing and inspiring you to run your first ultra race.
Are you ready to feel the highest highs and the lowest lows? Are you ready to do what you once thought was impossible? Are you ready for your Trail to 100? Thank you for joining us here on Trail to 100, the podcast made to help you finish your first 100-mile race. My name is Jacob Bateman, and normally my beautiful and lovely wife joins me, but today she was not feeling good due to her carrying my child and things starting to get closer and closer to the baby coming soon, as it's less than 2 months away now, 6 weeks, somewhere in that time frame. And so she was not feeling good today, and so we excused her from the pod. But don't worry, guys. She sends her love. She loves the Trail to 100 community and was sad that she wasn't able to join on for this episode. But we have the next best thing to my wife, Birk Olson, as our guest joining us today. So Birk, as many of you might recognize that name vaguely, I talked about Birk in my Scout Mountain 100-mile recap. Birk was another runner that probably shared a good 20 to 25 total miles together with him. We ran a good portion of the race together, and he was able to finish his first 100-mile race there at Scout, but that was actually his second attempt, guys. And so he's got a really neat story about how he ended up progressing in his ultra running journey, signed up for that first 100 and DNF'd on his first 100. And then 8 weeks later, signs up for one of the hardest 100-mile races you could in the area. He goes from a 100-mile race with 5,000 feet to a 100-mile race with 23,000 feet. 9 weeks after his DNF, because he just wanted to get that 100-mile distance accomplished and knew that he could. So Birk shares some amazing insights about mentally getting over it, getting over the distance, getting over the training, getting over the physical hard parts, just mentally getting over it. Talks about respecting the distance, not overanalyzing things, and being patient with yourself and your training. So it was a great episode. I had a fun time reminiscing with Birk, and we'll let you guys hear how he was able to finish his first 100-mile race. Well, Birk, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast today. I know from personal experience with you out on your first completed 100, had a fun time getting to know you, and I'm excited to chat about that race with you since I was able to be a part of that with you. So thanks for coming on. I know you're a busy man.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to recap our little adventure that we had.
Yeah, yes, for sure. So for those of you who don't know, and if you haven't listened to my recap of the Scout Mountain 100, I mentioned this guy named Birk a lot throughout the race that I came across. So Birk also finished the Scout Mountain 100, and he inspired me along the way. But anyway, so Birk, before we get into the actual race, tell just our listeners a little bit about yourself outside of running. Let us know who you are and what you're up to in the world besides finishing 100-mile races in Idaho.
Sure. So I've always kind of been into athletics. I played college sports. I played college football, which is a lot different than kind of endurance sports. But once I was done with that, that was something that I was always kind of interested in, is kind of the whole kind of gamut of endurance sports. And my wife and I had this like budding interest in triathlon. So after we both finished our respective college careers, we kind of had this goal to complete an Ironman. So I guess 2 years out of college, we did our first one together, and I think we kind of developed this love of it for together, and it was something that we could spend time together and do as a couple. But then I quite literally the day after I finished our first Ironman, I started medical school, and I quickly kind of came to the realization that I wasn't going to be able to train all three disciplines anymore. And I'm a really bad swimmer, and biking takes a long time, so I just chose to like keep the running up. So throughout medical school, I ran a lot. I was not the fastest runner, so marathons didn't really appeal to me. That type of the marathon speed, I guess I may never have, but ultra marathons seemed like kind of a cool thing. Where we were in the Northeast, there weren't a lot of great trails to run on, but we found some good ones, and I kind of found this love of trail running, and from that thought about like different races we could do, and I think I signed up for like a 50K, or no, I did a 50K like self-supported once, and then the first kind of official race I did was a 70K on Long Island, which went pretty poorly. I think it's like a common theme in ultras is like people have a terrible time and then they finish and then they want to do another one almost immediately. And that definitely applies to me. So after I did the 70K, I kind of set my sights on 100K, and then I did 100K, so like self-supported. Then I guess the big one is the 100 miler, which I think for a lot of people is like a big milestone. It's obviously the theme of this podcast, so it's a big deal. So that's what I decided I wanted to do and set my sights on it.
So I had no clue that you did your first 50K and your first 100K as self-supported. I think that's legit. That I have mad respect for anyone who does a self-supported run of that distance. Was that, looking back, do you think it made it harder or easier to do like a new distance self-supported rather than doing it in a race?
I don't know. I feel like during races, I always get a little too excited. So like these self-supported ones were, I mean, they were technically training runs that I was just doing more as like confidence boosters. I think for me, like every time I would run a longer distance, it would just give me confidence to like go and do the next one. So I kind of knew going in to trying to run 100, which was always like a distant goal that I never really acknowledged, but was always kind of thinking about that doing those distances would kind of be important for like the mental side of the race.
Stepping it up. Yeah, I get you. The confidence boost. Yeah, you got to have those really hard training runs. Agreed, 100%. Something you want to implement, especially if you're going for a new distance. So then what was this time frame of like 50K to first 100-mile race? How far was that time frame? Was that a year, 2 years, 3 years? What was that?
Yeah, it was about 2 years. It took a lot to like ramp up to where I could even like run over 20 miles like on a consistent basis. So I kind of just like built the confidence, especially on the trails. I think like transitioning to running on trails consistently was challenging for me. I just didn't have like a lot of the technical skill you need. And like I said, in the Northeast, the trails aren't the greatest, but there's a few out there on the AT that are pretty intense and technical. So just like building my confidence up, those like first 2 years of medical school were key to like where I feel like I could do like a 20-mile run and not totally gas myself. And then like anything, like we've said before, it's always more fun training when you're training for something. So I found this like 70K that was like during kind of my third year of medical school that I did in like the springtime. And leading up to that, I did the self-supported 50 and then the 70K, which by all accounts was kind of like an easier race. The terrain wasn't too bad, but again, it was like one of those instances where like I'd never done this distance before. I think I got to like, it's like a 42-mile race. I think I was like in the low, just like past the marathon mark when I was like really starting to hurt. And it was just, and it wasn't like a physical hurt. It was very much like a mental hurt when I like think about it. like looking back. But so I did that one, and then I kind of had a busy summer where I wasn't training a ton, and I picked up training again like a year ago this fall, where I was like, doing like consistent like 30, 40 mile weeks, and just did a build into a 100 miler that I tried in March this past year. That was at Antelope Canyon in Page, Arizona. And like I said before, leading up to that, I did a 100K kind of self-supported just as a training run. I mean, that brought me my first 100 miler, which definitely did not go as planned.
Yeah.
But
so take us through that. So your first 100-mile attempt was, you said, in March at was it the Antelope Canyons 100 miler? Is that what it was called, down there by Arizona, southern Utah area, right?
yeah, it's Page, Arizona. It's like right on the border, I guess. And it's one of those like cool races where they set it up. It's through like the vacation races folks, and they take you through Antelope Canyon, which is like that really famous kind of slot canyon that's like 100 miles deep, or not 100 miles, 100 feet deep. And then you go out to Horseshoe Bend, which is just around the corner, which is like just this big, cool panoramic shot of the Colorado River. So yeah, I mean, that was a race that was kind of going to be like, hopefully like check the 100 mile box. But it definitely didn't go as planned. It's like on paper, like not a super challenging race. I think the total vert is like 500 or 5,000 over 100 miles. And, other than some sandy sections, the terrain isn't super challenging. And it's a time of year where in Arizona, it's like beautiful in March. I swear, I think they got 5 years worth of rain in like the 24 hours that race went on. And it just like the way that rain turned the sand into mud just totally crushed my spirits that night. It was a 6 a.m. start, and it was a 30-hour cutoff, so I had to finish by noon the next day, and I think kind of hit like my terminal low around like 2 a.m. of that race. Otherwise, I've been doing pretty good. Like I dealt with some like GI issues, probably like the first 50 miles of the race, but nothing catastrophic. Kind of took it easy and got over that. The rain definitely just like crushed my spirits. And it wasn't the rain, it was the fact that I was like running in like a foot of mud basically. And I was having trouble like navigating. I was like getting off course a lot. I remember talking to you in the middle of our race about all my issues, and yeah, I just got to the point where I was just like mentally out of it, and my wife was crewing me, and I basically just like told her, I'm like, I like have no desire to keep going. It was like mile 78, but I had already decided like a few miles earlier I was done, and then in your head, you're like, okay, now I just need to make it to the next aid station, and then I can pull out.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And my poor wife, Anna, was like, she really wanted me to like go do it. Like this is what you wanted to do. And I just, in that moment, I was like totally like defeated. So there was no convincing me at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said, we sent you an email before this, and you said that by the time that you quit with 6 hours left in the cutoff. And then you said, but by the time the cutoff was reached, or something along those lines, that you were already convinced that you were going to try that race again. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, just quite literally what I wrote. I remember it was, yeah, like 5 or 6 a.m. and it was like daylight savings time, so the times were all messed up. But it was 5 or 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up, and like I said, I was done, and like my body was wrecked. Like I certainly couldn't have kept running, but I remember we were at the hotel and we were driving around town like that morning, and we saw somebody who was like still running and was probably going to finish by all accounts. I think I checked afterwards, and they ended up finishing. It was like 10:30. They had like an hour and a half left, and I remember just like seeing that person and being like, "Geez, like I quit. Like I could have kept running. Like I might not have made the cutoff, just kind of the way things were going, but I could have kept going." And that really kind of like crushed me inside to know that like nobody like forced me to quit. Like it would have been one thing if they were like, you didn't make cutoff, and I'd be like, all right, well, I gave
Yeah.
it my best shot. But then I really felt like that like responsibility to myself. Like I did this to myself. I could have kept going, and I just chose not to. So that really like ate at me. And then I knew I'm like, I'm gonna have to do another race. Like I'm not gonna be able to like, in anticipation of starting my medical residency in these 5 years, I like have basically no realistic chance of being able to train for 100 again. And I just knew I would have to do one like in the next 2-3 months, or else it would really kind of eat at me.
Yeah, yeah. That you weren't gonna realistically, the time wasn't gonna be there in the near future. So then, how quickly did you find that next race?
I found it basically on the way home. Like before we even got on the plane to go home, I found a couple of races. I knew we'd be. I found out that we were gonna be moving to Utah like the Monday after the race or the Friday after the race. And at that point, I was just like looking for hundreds around there. And so it was like there was one in Colorado and then Scout Mountain up in Idaho. And Scout Mountain is like 2 hours from Salt Lake or a little over 2 hours. So it was like perfect race for us. And so that was kind of on my radar. But I guess even though I was like really motivated after the race, I was probably like too motivated because I got home and I'd given myself like a week to recover. But then I had like a full training week after that week off. And then that like Saturday, I went out for a long run and it was like I had a really like terrible run. I ended up like taking the short way home, and of course it rained again, which was there wasn't any mud, but it was like PTSD. Like
It's the
rain.
trauma of the rain.
Yeah. And I just I got home and I was just like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. But then I kind of I realized that I don't think I definitely did not give my body enough time to like recover, even though I didn't do the full 100. I put in a pretty significant effort, and I needed a little more time. So
Yeah, I mean, 78 miles still requires some recovery time.
for sure, for sure. So I think like I had this sense of urgency because the race was only like whatever, like 8-9 weeks later. Scout Mountain was.
Yeah,
I knew it was going to be a harder race because it's like 21,000 feet of vert in the mountains. I get a little more cutoff time, but like other than that, by all accounts, it was like a much harder race, and I'd never done like a true mountain race, so I knew that it was going to be an even greater challenge. So I was very kind of like eager to like get training again, but I definitely that first week back, I like overdid it.
yeah. I mean, I got mad respect. I remember you telling me this out on the trail about how you went from Antelope Canyons with 5,000 total feet of vert to a race that's got now 23,000 feet of vert, like 8, 9 weeks later. Yeah, like that's a pretty big jump in like, training for a 5,000 foot race compared to a 20 plus. I mean, it's a big difference there, it's going up and down constantly. So I guess how did you fit in? How did you prepare for a vert race like that in that short amount of time?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just kind of like mentally getting over that because yeah, it's just sound a little overwhelming to go sign up for a race that is 4 times as much climbing. That's in real mountains. I think everyone out here doesn't really consider the Northeast to have any real mountains, but just like mentally, getting over that and saying like you can do this was kind of like step one. And then I got out like kind of the hardest trails I knew up in like in New York, and there's some pretty good stuff out there like on the AT that like really challenged me. I think I had a couple like 20 to 30 mile runs where I think I was getting like around like 8 or 9 thousand feet of climbing. So some pretty serious stuff, and on tough terrain, the mountains out there. I mean, trail running is just not as big of a thing. So like there aren't really like as much established good like single dirt track trails. It's a lot of like open rock and nasty stuff like that. But yeah, I got out for a few runs like that, and those were kind of confidence boosters because I at least read online that Scout Mountain had some really nice single track dirt that we could run on. So that part of it made me feel a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, just like getting a lot of vert in. I think those weeks I definitely was like pushing like close to 20,000 feet over the course of like the 5 runs a week I would do. So
Dang. That's awesome. That's amazing. I didn't even get
matter of
close to
fact,
that.
where I lived, we had very few hills. So I would when I wouldn't drive like the 2 hours to get into New York, there was this one like steep hill that was basically like a driveway that went down to like the river that we lived by, and I would just run up and down that, and it was miserable. But I got my vert in, so
Yeah.
I knew that was kind of going to be the critical part of the race, and thankfully that's something I've always kind of been strong with. Like I think from maybe like my football background and a lot of like weight training I did, I think I just have like natural, like pretty good lower body strength. So like hills, about if I had a strength, it would probably be doing hills. So
Yeah. That's awesome. So then take us to race day or the day before the race. I guess, how were you feeling since you had previously DNF'd your first attempt? Like, what's going through your mind as now you're getting ready, you're in Pocatello, you're getting ready for this 100-mile race, and you know what happened through the first attempt. Now, how are you going to make sure this doesn't happen in this round two? What mentally were you feeling?
yeah, I think just having been there, and in the previous race, I think just when you compared like the mindsets I had, they were like totally different. In the first race, I was probably maybe even like overconfident, thinking like, okay, like I've done 100K distance, like this is not a super tough, there's not a lot of terrain here. I felt like I was like well trained, and like like had like a good taper and was feeling really good. And I didn't really like I don't think I expected the amount of hurt that I had during that race. But and versus like Scout Mountain, I certainly went into it with like a ton of respect, not just for the distance but also for the course. So I think that was kind of what I was lacking in the first race. And then also, I don't want to like say it was like desperation, but it was kind of like my last chance to do this in a long time. So I just kind of knew how disappointed I felt in myself, like having not been able to do it the first time, and I knew how disappointed I would be if I couldn't do it this time. So like I went into it with kind of that mindset, and then also just like the mindset that like if I don't finish the race and I like don't make cutoff, like that's fine. Like I would be happier with that than I would like if I like pulled out of a race having not, been forced off. That was my mentality going in. I was just like, I'm just gonna run the race, and if I don't make cutoff, I don't make cutoff. Like at least then I can say like I gave it my best shot. It just I wasn't in good enough shape. Like that's totally different than just deciding you're not gonna go on. I think that's in my mind it's totally different. So that and the day before the race, I like almost couldn't sleep. I was so excited just because like I wanted to get this monkey off my back type of thing. Like I wanted to do it so bad. I wasn't impatient. I was just like really excited. I also knew that Scout Mountain was like just an incredible landscape. I hadn't been there, but I'd seen pictures and I just heard what people had to say about it, and I was just really excited to get out and
Yeah.
run in those mountains a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really like what you share about just respecting the distance, respecting the course, making that mental decision already, like that I'm not gonna pull myself off. If I get pulled off, it's gonna have to be someone else, and just really sit, pretty much taking quitting out of the equation. And I think that's really key as I think about my races and how things have gone in the past when I haven't really the races that haven't gone well, or where I've had the most mental anguish of should I quit or should I not. I feel like I hadn't mentally totally prepared for that distance beforehand, so I didn't know how to handle it. So I like how you were saying that, you just mentally prepared. you respected it and you were just ready to go. So take us through race day, Burke. A whole 104 miles out there on Scout Mountain in Pocatello. So take us through how it went. So you went when things started to progress, when things got hard. Was there a point where you wanted to quit?
Yeah, I think we had about as good of race conditions the first part of the race you probably could have asked for. It was kind of like overcast and cool, but not cold. We got rolling around noon, which I actually, going in, already kind of helped me mentally because I knew that I would be running all night on fresher legs, which is something that I think, running at night in my previous 100 also kind of got to me. So yeah, we started at noon, had really good weather. The scenery hits you like immediately. I mean, we were just in these incredible like wildflower filled prairies or like mountainous prairie, and it was incredible. So great way to start. The group kind of stayed together early on, but we kind of thinned out pretty quick. I think early on in the race, I knew that there would be a lot of really good runners there, so I was kind of just locked into like running my own race. But also it was like really narrow single track, so there were some portions where I was probably just out of like courtesy, so like I wouldn't be like flip flopping with people all the time, but maybe running a little bit faster than I should have been doing. And then especially on like I remember the first big downhill, people were just like busting down this downhill.
Yeah.
And I was like, maybe for like a tenth of a mile, a quarter of a mile, I was kind of like going along with it. And then I realized I'm like, these people have run in the mountains a lot more than me. Like this is really gonna mess me up if I keep bombing down this. So I slowed like way down, which kind of, put me farther back in the group, which didn't bother me, except, it is more fun when you can kind of be around people and not feel like you're pulling up the rear. But I think,
well, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember the same exact thing on that first big downhill there at Scout. Like I remember just everyone started passing me up because climbing's kind of my thing. I like the climb, and I've never been a great downhill runner, and people just start cruising past me. I'm like, how in the blazes are they going that fast already? And I'm like, there's no way in heck I'm keeping that pace, But anyways, so you weren't alone in that feeling. So yeah.
Sure. And I think what it was too is like the runners in that race were like really strong runners. Like I went back afterwards and just kind of like went through some of their finishes. It's like published on different places like Ultra Sign Up and things like that. And I was like blown away. I'm like, wow, there were some real strong runners in this race. Like I don't feel bad at all about getting passed by all of them. They really know what they're doing. I kind of found myself there, like kind of farther back, but I wasn't super bothered by it. The first big climb was that climb up Old Tom, which I guess probably the biggest climb of the whole course. That's when I really realized where I was compared to everybody else, because like that there were people that were all the way down when I was just like starting to like see what I was about to climb. So you got a sense of like where other people were at. Not that, of course, that it mattered for me, but it did, it's just something you notice. That climb was tough. I remember thinking on the way up, I'm like, I knew it was probably one of the hardest climbs, but I also just like expected to feel a little fresher. It wasn't something like that us mere mortals like Jacob and I can run up. It's something that we pretty much just took out the trekking poles and
put the head down and grind.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean that was a tough climb, and I also started. Yeah, I got a little low on water, which kind of messed with my head a little bit because I didn't want to get behind on hydration. So,
well, I remember that's when I came across you was coming down Old Tom, where we met for the first time. I don't know if you were in front of me, I was in front of you. I don't know who caught up to who, but I remember coming across you. So this is what we're like mid-20s, right, mileage-wise at this point. And I think that was one of the first things you said to me. You're like, dude, is there like a water spot somewhere around here? And you were asking about water, and you were low on water. And we still had a good, like, I think like 4 or 5 miles to the aid station. And
didn't do a perfect job on the water. I think I like expected an aid station somewhere where they didn't have one, so I think it just kind of. I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't like catastrophic. Like I kind of like knew what I was in for, and I wasn't didn't get too behind. So, but yeah, that's where we met. Kind of at the bottom below Tom. I think we both said the same thing to each
Yeah.
other. We were
Because
like,
I was nearly out at that point too.
yeah, and we were both kind of like feeling our legs, and we're like, I don't know if I should feel like this, this early on. But I think that's like something that's common in like ultras is like, you know, in that moment, if you like overanalyze things, you can be like, wow, like, or especially when you start thinking about how much distance you have left, you could be like, wow, like my legs feel like they're 80% gone, and I still have 75% of this race to do. But which I think in my first 100, I definitely that affected me a lot more. But in this race, I was just kind of like, yeah, I think I have more in my legs than I think I do. And, you don't necessarily recover, but, you kind of have your highs and lows with how you feel your legs are doing. So, yeah, I think we rolled in pretty close to each other at that one aid station. I think I picked up the pace a little bit because I was just so thirsty. I was like, I need to get to this aid station and drink some water. But that was like around mile like 28, 30, I think. And then I think after that, I was feeling pretty good once I got some water in me. And then it was like going in, it was like right as the sun was going down, we rolled into that West Fork aid station. And I saw you and Ryan go out, and I was kind of like feeling not the greatest. And I just kind of like tagged along with you guys and just thinking like, oh, like I'll hang out with these guys for a little bit. They'll probably like leave me out in a little while because you guys looked pretty fresh and looked like you were doing well. And I remember the whole time thinking like, I'm so happy that we have Ryan here because he was like such a chatterbox. And we kept telling him like he kept saying like, hey, listen, like if you want me to shut up, I can shut up, like whatever you guys need, I could. And we both said the same thing. We're like, no, keep talking. It like makes me think about something else because going into
Yeah.
that night is, I think everybody kind of a lot of people experience it. The over like the running through the night, it can be really challenging, like mentally. So having him with us, I think that was like mile 30 something to like 48, or I don't know, but that was perfect. That was exactly what I
Yeah.
needed to get through that part
Well,
of the night.
I mean, honestly, I know it was a lot of due to you're new to the area. You don't really know a lot of runners. I don't even know how I would make it through a 100-mile race running through the night on my own. Like
Yeah,
it's I love like I would highly recommend for anyone thinking of doing 100, get a pacer for the night stretch because it's intimidating. Everything is harder in the night. You don't, it's just you and that light in front of you, and you can get into your head so easily. So on my part, I was happy to have you there because in my opinion, the more people through the night, the better. And plus, you had the GPX file on your watch,
yeah.
and me
I
like
was happy I
any,
could offer something to the team, a little bit of
yeah,
that. Actually. I mean, the race was very well marked, but it was kind of like a nice little like
yeah, it's
because sometimes you get that race brain and you don't know if you're going forward or backwards.
yeah.
Um,
Because I
but
remember questioning a few times, and I'd be like, Burke, are we on course? And you
yeah,
pull it up, and you're like, yep, we're good.
yeah, that worked out perfect. So yeah, so I mean, we had I don't know. I thought we had a pretty good stretch there of like 10, 15 miles. I know you had some GI problems, and I was certainly happy just to like sit down on the side of the trail and let you work through that. I was happy to take a little break, and Ryan was like a constant source of positivity, which I think we both appreciated.
Yeah,
So, yeah, we had a good night, and one of the things that I won't forget about it is when like you just kind of like took in the moment and was like, like how many people are like doing this at like the middle, like midnight on a like tonight, and like it was like a totally clear night and the stars were out, and it was just like incredible. It was like one of those
yeah,
things where it's like, yeah, like most Saturday nights, you spend just hanging
yeah,
out, watching Netflix or doing whatever, and it's like those are such like forgettable experiences compared to like doing something like this, and
yeah.
that really that like hit me. And the other thing is what we were saying, to go back to just doing 100 and having a pacer through the night, is like the people in this like community are so like supportive. And I know you guys were like totally 100% willing to like let me run with you and like and kind of take what I needed to like get through the race. And I think for people who are listening to this that kind of have that aspiration of running 100, is to know that you're probably going to end up in like a super supportive group. And if you like, don't be shy about asking people if you can run together, because I think, like you said, it helps a lot.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, I was so happy to have you there. Sounds like you were happy to tag along with us at that point. And I just couldn't believe that you would wait on me as I was over there throwing up. And I was like, this guy's gonna leave me any moment. Like, I running off into the bushes to take a crap. And then anyways, you talk about taking in the moment. It just makes me laugh because we had a nice moment under the stars, but then here you are on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. sitting waiting for some guy you just met 5 hours ago who's crapping in the bushes. So you get all kinds of moments on a 100-mile race.
It's the highs and lows of those type of races.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think we ran into mile 48 together. You know, you were,
and that's when we ended up separating at that point.
Yeah. And I just, said, appreciate you guys, hanging out with me for a little bit. I didn't want to make you feel like, oh, we got to get going. I wanted to kind of like,
no. And I was glad that you were going your pace at that point, because that's where for our listeners out there, that was a really big low point for me. I felt like garbage at that point. I had just done unspeakable things to the porta potty, and my body was not feeling well. And so I knew I would need a long time in order to kind of get myself ready to go again. So I was happy that you were feeling good and ready to go again. So tell me how that went. How did that next section go for you? So this is now the early morning hours, like you're talking 3, 4, 5 a.m.
Yeah, that was a tough stretch, just like going out by myself. It started like raining maybe a little bit. I put on my rain jacket and was kind of getting a little cold, but it probably went, I guess, better than I thought it would be. I'm like, oh, I'm going out by myself. Like this is like, it feels very much like the previous race where I got really frustrated running at night. But it just kind of like chugged along, and like I said, it was a beautiful night and trails were nice, so didn't really have anything to feel bad about. I was, for the most part, staying on top of my nutrition. So yeah, I think that was like a 12-mile stretch. I got into mile 60 like just before dawn. And part of it too is like a lot of people experience this, is that you get a little boost from that sun coming up. So I was kind of anticipating that, and running towards the sunrise. And the other thing that kind of motivated me through that stretch was my wife Anna was going to be pacing me from like mile 60 to 70ish. So I was looking forward to seeing her and running with her a little bit. So, I mean, by all accounts, that segment I was okay, except I broke the tip on my pole. So I was like running with this stubby pole for the next 40 miles, but it was fine. I mean, it is what it is. So came into mile 60 by myself. My wife started running with me. We had a pretty, I don't know, I feel like I'm only talking about the tough stretches, but I was excited to start running with her. We were going pretty slow because that was that climb. It was this big climb out of Mill Creek, or not Mill Creek, but whatever, or City Creek for that race. Just a brutal climb, and I was getting a little tired. And I remember there were these benches that were along this stretch, and I like just laid down on this bench for like 5 minutes and had like this incredible like mini nap. And I think a lot of ultra runners talk about like taking mini naps during races, and I'd never done it before, but I could tell you when I woke up I felt at least like 50% better and ready to rock and do that waterfall climb up City Creek.
How long was that nap then?
It was like 5 minutes. I laid down and I told Anna, I'm like 5 minutes max. And I remember thinking initially like, oh, I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to sleep. And the next thing I knew, she was like waking me up, and I felt like I'd slept a really long time. And
that's awesome. I've never actually had a mini nap in an ultra, so it's cool to hear about it.
Give it a try. I mean, if you need it, you need it. And I felt a lot better. And she's like, "Yeah, you were like snoring almost immediately." I'm like, "Wow, I really needed it." And it was perfect timing because it was when that climb got really bad out of City Creek. We were basically like climbing this waterfall, and then it was like this really bad grade up out of that. And
Yeah, it was really steep coming out of that.
yeah, we made it through that, and then it was a beautiful morning. And we had really nice weather. We ran together for a little while till mile like 78 or what or whatever it was. Mile 78 was big for me because that's where I quit in the previous race, and like timing wise, everything was okay. Like in terms of the cutoff, and so
Yeah, you were killing it because I know you were nowhere in my sight that whole time. So, and
yeah,
I thought you might have dropped because when I came into mile 60, I thought maybe I'd catch you, but you were already out of there. And they were talking about this guy who just came in and he was having GI issues and he just dropped and he just walked off the course before I had gotten in. I was like, because I didn't know of a lot of guys ahead of me at that point.
yes.
And I'm like, oh no, was that Burke? And then I'm like, Burke drop. And so, anyways, that was discouraging for me. I kind of assumed it was you because I couldn't think of anybody else. And I was already really struggling. I'm like, and I wanted to quit at that point. I'm like, well, Burke dropped, and anyways, but lo and behold, you go ahead.
I'm happy that didn't mess you up. Yeah, I remember seeing that guy. He was in rough shape. So anyway, yeah, I mean, anyway, I said I guess made it to 78. That was like the start of the climb up Scout, or like pretty
Yeah.
close to it. And there was that aid station kind of halfway through, and I remember it was like an out and back to the aid station, and I remember leaving, and I like saw it. I saw you had the yellow shirt or something that was like unmistakable. I'm like, holy crap! Like it's Jacob. Like you made it. I was so excited because I started to think that I wasn't going to see you either because there were a couple other like out and backs to aid stations where I was like looking for you to see if you were close
Yeah.
by. I hadn't seen you, and I saw you, and I was like so pumped because I knew you were really hurting last time I saw you. So
Yeah.
it was a
Dude,
huge boost to see you there.
and it was a huge boost for me. I don't know about what was going through your head. Like I guess you were pumped and like yeah, when I saw you cuz I thought maybe you had dropped. I thought you were that guy that everyone was talking about. And so seeing you out on the course just jacked me up. And I was kind of in a jacked up mode at that point anyways. I
Yeah,
remember
you
my
have energy, man. I don't know anybody who's got that kind of energy at mile 80.
dude, well, it was for me. So I was pissed. What really had happened is I turned my pissed off energy into let's get pumped energy because I was ticked about that out and back because it had been added on to the course.
Oh yeah,
Because of
it's
snow
like salt.
conditions. Yeah.
Yeah, it was total salt in the wound. I remember thinking the same thing. I'm like, like I knew logistically they had to do it, but
Yeah.
at that point, I'm like, we don't need bonus mileage. We're already
Yeah.
running so much.
And then I was like, what? And they couldn't even increase, like, this is 104 miles now, and they couldn't even increase the cutoff time by 30 minutes or anything. You add on like 3 miles and just say,
Yeah,
go do it anyways. And so I was pissed off, but I've learned that sometimes you just, I don't know, something clicks in my mind where it's like, you know what, screw it all. And then I just like
yeah,
get pumped, like I'm doing this anyways, sort of thing. So, and then
yeah.
seeing you just pumped me up. I'm like, oh, heck
You're
yeah. So,
still alive. Yeah, yeah. I was. That was a big moment for me. I was, like, going up the rest of the scout was
yeah.
a lot more fun because of that.
And I was
Um,
actually wanting to catch you at that point. When I saw you, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go catch Burke. Never did, but anyways, keep it
well,
rolling.
I was hoping you would. I wasn't trying to outrun you or anything. I was just, I was thinking that would be great to run together for a little bit. But then also, I think we both kind of understood. We were close to the cutoff, and that there was a storm that rolled in, and I guess I'm a wimp about lightning because I was all worried about climbing up Scout with lightning rolling through, and all these guys were like, "Well, we'll be fine," type of thing. So there were a few sections where I was kind of like waiting out to see if the lightning would blow through, and it eventually did. And by the time I got to the top of Scout, it was like pretty much cleared out. And then I think there were a few times I looked back and I saw you guys a little bit farther up the hill, and I was kind of like, well, I'm just gonna like keep going. They'll probably catch me, and I think we rolled down that and made it into finish. I think you were probably like only like 5 or 10 minutes behind me or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was about 10 minutes behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, it was just like just want to make cutoff. Like I think we both came in like just after 35 hours around. So
Yeah.
uh, I was just I knew you were gonna make it, but I just wanted to keep my momentum going. And
Oh,
at
yeah.
that point, I had a little bit of that pissed off energy too because there were just a few things like getting down Scout through that snow. I fell so many times. And,
Yeah.
uh,
There was
uh,
huge snowbanks for all our listeners, like massive snowbanks that we had to run down. I actually ended up sliding down on my butt down that big long one. I literally
yeah,
sat down and slid.
yeah, I did that a couple times too, and yeah, that was tough, and it got a little like muddy and nasty, and
Yeah.
uh, but whatever. At that point in the race, I'm like, I just want to finish, and the finish line is in sight. So even though we had like a couple hours of running left ahead of us, so
Yeah.
yeah, the last part was kind of a blur. I think I was just like kind of had that finish line mentality. I just wanted to get there and be done with it, type of thing. And it was getting dark again, and I don't know. I think the darkness just
It
sets me
kind of
off.
sucks when you see two nightfalls on one run, right?
Yeah, it was no sleep in between, or like 3 hours
Yeah.
of sleep for me. Yeah, it was. I think everybody has that point where it's just like, let's just get this over with, type of thing. And but I was I don't know. Making it to the finish, like the finish was kind of like a very like hard to take it moment. Just kind of that like that feeling of seeing the race director at the end, shaking his hand, giving him a hug, and seeing Anna and kind of soaking in that it all really happened was a good moment. And they had incredible post race food. That baked potato was phenomenal.
Yeah, they did have incredible post-race food. I've never had a better baked potato in my life. So if you
Yeah.
want the best baked potato, go to the Scout Mountain Ultras. That
Well,
that that's awesome.
it's Idaho. They had to live up to their
Yeah,
potato reputation, right?
100%, 100%. So how did it feel then to get the monkey off your back and be able to claim 100-mile finisher?
It was a huge relief, and that's pretty much how I describe it as a relief. I think personally, I just was very set on finishing, and I just was relieved to have done
Yeah,
it. It was it's something that you really kind of soak in. Like for me, at least, it was like kind of like the week afterwards. I kind of had to remind myself, like, yeah, I finally did it. It's something I've been thinking about for so long and had failed at, and kind of had a rocky road to make it. And yeah, I was just um, it didn't really like hit me until like kind of like the week afterwards, and once my brain was functioning again, the few days afterwards were I was kind of a zombie, to be honest.
yeah, no, 100%. I feel the same way. I think relief is a very common feeling after your first 100-mile race. That's exactly how I felt after my first 100-mile finish. So just a couple more questions. Sorry,
Yeah,
I've kept you a little bit long
no
here.
worries, no worries. It's
But
been fun reminiscing.
yes, it has been. It's been fun flashing back to those miles on the mountain. So now looking back at this overall ultra running experience of trying to get this 100-mile distance achieved, what do you think is the most important lesson that you learned, or what's one of your biggest takeaways from it?
I think this is a common theme, and people talk about this a lot in ultras. Is like it's such a like a long and like challenging distance. Like I think everybody is kind of they're challenging themselves in a way. So you're gonna have these like really kind of like low moments where you're gonna want to quit, and you're gonna be like doing the calculations in your head, like this is how fast I'm gonna have to run to make cutoff, or this is how fast I'm gonna have to run to make whatever your goal time was, and you're gonna have moments where you feel like you're like the last person on the course. I think I've felt like that before, where like everybody else is done and has gone home, and I'm going to make it to the finish line, and they're going to be all cleaned up and gone. But I think your brain, like psychologically, your brain is just it's biologically programmed to like preserve you, and running 100 miles is not necessarily good for your survival. So what I'm trying to say is like you're gonna like have the moments where like you definitely like want to quit, and that's what I had in my first race, and you just have to like not accept that and like not have that like level of defeat. And it's so much easier just to say it out loud than it is to actually do, but just to like be prepared like not to ever accept that. And was like I said earlier, was the biggest difference between my first and second race, is like I was not like gonna accept it. Like somebody could tell me that I didn't make it, but I wasn't gonna like tell myself. And then just count on getting out of it. It does happen. I think there are highs and lows. Your highs are never going to be as high as your previous highs. It's kind of like this diminishing level of high. You're closer to the finish line, so there's that aspect of it. So just kind of like taking it in stride and recognizing that it's a long race, and that those things kind of pass you by.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. You said earlier about like not overanalyzing things, and I think that's actually amazing advice to go along with what you're saying. You're gonna be calculating things in your head like, oh, can I actually run this pace for this much longer? Am I actually gonna make that cutoff, to where you want to quit before you even actually can see if you can make that cutoff, and that overanalyzing and not just taking it in stride, and not just taking it one step at a time can come back to haunt you, to where you pull before you really have seen if you can actually do it or not. So I think that's great advice there. So I like to ask every Ironman person who's done Ironmans this as well. Is running 100 miles harder than doing an Ironman? And is there a trail distance that is like equivalent to doing an Ironman?
I wouldn't say there's an equivalence. I think that the mind, my mindset when I was doing the Ironman was like I actually had like a speed goal in mind.
Okay.
Because I was kind of like a naturally a decent cyclist, so
Gotcha.
In my mind, like that whole race, I'm like, I want to get this time or that time. It wasn't necessarily about finishing. Whereas like the running 100 miles was just about finishing.
So it was just like a different mental aspect. You were challenging yourself in different ways.
Yeah, 100%. I think, really talented endurance athletes can do really well in Ironmans, whereas really people who have a lot of like mental fortitude can do a lot better potentially in ultras. I think we see that with a lot of the pros out there. Like the reason that they're the best in the world is not necessarily because they're the fastest or most gifted runners. I think they're the best because they just mentally are totally like they're the best. They're rock solid, and they can crush those distances and not be discouraged by all the things out there to discourage you during an ultra.
Yeah, 100%. So, Birk, thank you for joining us today. I've had fun reminiscing on Scout Mountain. It's fun to talk with other runners who are out there with you on that day of everything that goes on. Before we let you go, though, we ask every runner this: what would be your top piece of advice for someone who wants to run 100 miles for the first time?
I think in terms of, the training is kind of the most critical thing, I think, and just being patient with that. It takes a lot of mileage, at least for me, to like not just have it in your legs and like to be physically able to do it, but to like in your head, wrap your head around running 100 miles. Because, if you're starting from scratch or you're starting from maybe like a marathon background, it can feel really overwhelming. and to just be patient with that and recognize that it's going to take a lot of long runs and a lot of just like solid training weeks to get to that point. And some people get there faster just because they're more, they're good gifted runners, and they have that mental fortitude. But I think everybody can develop like the mental fortitude that you need to run 100 miles, like as long as you're patient enough with your training and you're consistent. Really anybody can do it. You just have to stick with it.
Yeah, that's golden. And that's what we're all about here at Trail to 100. Anybody can do it. You just got to be patient with your training. I like that.
Yep.
That is golden advice. Well, Birk, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast today. We really appreciate you taking your time to come on and reminisce about your first 100-mile race.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
All right, so a big thank you to Birk Olson for coming on the pod. I really had a good time out here at Scout, and it was fun for me to talk to him about the race. I hope you guys benefited from that. I really loved some of his insights about being patient with your training. One of our messages here on Trail to 100 is anyone can run 100 miles. And you even heard Birk there say at the very end, pretty much anyone can do it. And we really agree with that. But sometimes you got to be patient with yourself. You got to be patient with your training. Some people are a little more naturally gifted than you might be. It might take you 5 years, it might take you 1 year. You never know. You never know. But the important thing is that you're putting in the training and you're doing the work and you're analyzing it and you're making progress either way. Even if it feels like you're not, just be consistent, be patient, and you'll get there. And for Birk, it didn't happen on round one, but he learned. He said it was mainly the mental aspect that got to him on his first race, but he learned from it. And he went into that second race with a different kind of mindset, and he killed it out there, guys. I was so impressed. He just always seemed steady and strong and just moving forward whenever I saw him during the race. So that really struck me. And what also struck me was just not overanalyzing things. For those of you who have heard my Scout Mountain recap, I overanalyzed way too much. And Birk was talking about when he was at mile like 25 and his legs were, just felt like they were like 80% gone, but you're only 25% of the way through the race. That math doesn't quite add up, and you start overanalyzing it. And that will lead to just you playing a bunch of mind games with yourself, and honestly leading to probably quitting early before you've really given it your all. I've found myself doing that all the time. Sometimes, runners carry their little charts on them that have like the cutoff times and their goal times of when they want to be to a certain aid station by this time and all that. And they keep that on them so they know if they're on track or off track or what pace they need to hold. And I think that can be kind of unhealthy in an ultra. And actually, like, I did that during Scout, and I think that was unhealthy for me. And I actually lost the chart in the 60-ish mile mark when everything was going to hell in a handbasket. And I think that I found the chart after the race. It was stuffed in my bag, but I think that was God incensed in a way saying, Jacob, stop looking at that chart. It's not doing you any good. So he hid it from me because it was right there in the spot where I told myself I would keep the chart after the race. I found it, but when I was trying to find it during the race, it was gone after the 60-mile mark. So anyways, just don't overanalyze it. Sure, that 15-mile pace that you might have to keep in order to get to this certain time, like, it might seem unrealistic, but just go. You just go and you give it your best shot and you'll surprise yourself. That's what I've found. So don't overanalyze it. Just take things in stride, like Birk said, and you'll surprise yourself with how well you do. So a big thank you to Birk. Thought he shared some real valuable insights there and helping us, a beginner, first timer, backup packers, whatever you are, experienced runner who's just looking to keep going. Birk really did share some great insights on that. So congratulations to him on that 100-mile race, and best of luck to him with his wife and his life and what goes on for him in the future. So that's going to wrap things up. Remember, guys, to check out our Trail to 100 store. It's trailto100.com. We have some sweet t-shirts. If you're looking at our YouTube version of this, I'm wearing the t-shirt right now, kind of trying to flash it for you. So we got our logo on it. It's a dark green shirt. It's really comfortable and soft. So go check it out. All the money, all the purchases, all that money just goes right back into the podcast to help keep this movement going forward of helping you and all the others out there finish their first 100-mile race. Remember, guys, if you want to run 100 miles, make it happen.
Hey guys, super exciting news! Pine Tree Running is now Trail to 100 coaching, and Jacob is officially a coach.
That's right. So if you're ready to take the next step in your training and run that race you've always wanted to run, we would be honored to help guide you on your ultra running journey.
At Trail to 100 Coaching, you'll receive a custom running plan with strength training options, constant communication with your coach, and you'll be connected with other runners like you who are also on their Trail to 100.
If you want to learn more, check out our website, trailto100.com. Please feel free to contact us with any questions you have.
If you want to run 100 miles,
Make it happen.